This conference will now be recorded.
Before we begin our presentation, I'd like to review a few points of protocol so that you'll get the most out of your webinar experience. Remember, you are listening to the webinar via a conference service. If you are disconnected, repeat the steps that were given to you by the registration email. In order to reduce background noise, please keep all microphones muted throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. There is an icon at the upper right-hand side of your screen. All questions will be addressed at the conclusion of the webinar. Please note that today's program is being recorded and will be available on the ACIL website. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters, Mr. Kelly Cravenor and Rebecca Smith. Kelly Cravenor leads the strategic planning and operational business actions for EST Analytical, a global manufacturer of analytical instruments with offices in the United States, the Netherlands, and China. Prior to EST Analytical, Kelly served in senior management roles at Procter & Gamble for 25 years. He is a board member for 2 nonprofit organizations in the greater Cincinnati area and currently serves on the ESS Executive Committee for ACIL. Rebecca Smith is the Vice President of Pickering Laboratories in Mountain View, California. She previously worked as a research chemist for Pickering and has extensive experience working in ACIL member environmental laboratories in a variety of analytical capacities. She currently serves on the ACIL Business Practices Forum Steering Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, we will go ahead and kick it off with Kelly Cravenor. So Kelly, welcome.
Thanks, Jessica, for the introduction. Really appreciate it. Hello, everybody out there. Happy Thursday afternoon towards you. Today, we are covering employee strategies to drive retention. And this is born out of the annual meeting we had where during the roundtable discussion, many of you who are here and also attended that listed this notion of employee retention as something that certainly warranted follow-up. And so that's just what we're doing. We're following up on some strategies to help you think about employee retention in your lab and some things that perhaps that you can consider to make sure your employees are engaged and retained. You know, my expectation is that you should walk away from this with a couple big rocks that should help you in your execution of keeping employees engaged and retained, and you'll probably get a few pebbles out of it too that I think will serve you well. So with that, let's talk a little bit about an interesting note that I saw. I just thought it'd be an interesting way to sort of start this off, this quote that if we don't listen, we will find ourselves surrounded by employees who have nothing to say. So the fact that all of you are taking the time to come and attend this tells me that you're listening for ideas that could help you keep your employees better engaged and also retained. To that end, here's an overview of the program. We'll talk a little bit about today's retention environment, of which you are all living. We'll talk about a plan overview, some overview things that you should consider if you don't have them currently being executed in your business as well. And probably most importantly, we'll get into some member perspective around some things people are doing today in labs that's driving increased employee engagement and retainment of personnel as well. So as it says, with a little help from my friends, the fact of the matter is we had some people who have contributed to this presentation, and I think ultimately makes it as good as it is. Kim Ramsey, Vice President of Nielsen Research Corporation, Rebecca Smith, Vice President at Pickering Laboratories, Inc., and Elon Sudberg, CEO at Alchemist Labs. Both Kim and Elon had some conflicts and were unable to join us for this, but certainly wanted to call them out because the content, some of the content that you're going to see was driven from the experiences they're having in their lab. And I'm pleased to have Rebecca joining me as well and my partner in crime to present this to you. As Jessica said, as we go through it, note any questions in the chat field that you might have, and then we'll address them at the end. My expectation is that this presentation will, and discussion will probably last somewhere in the 30-minute range just for your planning purposes. Clearly, we can go longer than that for those that have more questions and want to engage with other conversations as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about today's retention environment, things that you all are experiencing today. Obviously in the news, this notion of the Great Resignation seems to be everywhere. People are leaving their jobs and looking for employment in other places. And we'll talk a little bit about some insights as to why that may be happening And to that end, I took a look at a Harvard Business Review study of over 4,000 companies and about 9 million employee records. And this research borne out some things that I thought were interesting and worth sharing. Obviously, we know through the news that we had over 4 million people quit their job in July and almost 11 million open jobs in July. So clearly this employee resignation piece is making all the news because it's just happening so often. And what this particular study found was that the greatest increase of the employee type, if you will, that's leaving is the mid-level employee, the employee that's, generally bell-shaped curve, somewhere in the 35 years old, 30 to 45 years old. And some of the reason for them in particular is this notion of employees wanting more remote virtual workplaces means that there is likely to be less training and orientation for new hires. And as a result, companies are looking for employees that are more plug and play, people who have more experience, that with minimal training and orientation, they can come in and make a difference right away. And so what that means is it offers greater leverage for those mid-level employees because the demand for them is higher and higher. And as a result, they're looking to take advantage of that leverage that they have and move on. And also, this survey spoke to this idea of a break point, and that these mid-level managers, again, bell-shaped curve, have a tendency to have more of the work fall on them as employees. The traditional do more with less tends to fall on these mid-level employees. And so those are some reasons why the largest group of employees that are taking on this great resignation is this mid-level employee. And that resignations for the, call it 20 to 25 and 60 plus age ranges, according to this study, have seemed to stabilize. This data may or may not be consistent with what you're seeing in your company, but I thought it was an interesting study to review and shed some light on insights that are happening today. Here's some considerations for all of us, and particularly for this idea of reasons for remote work. The top three that came out was escape the manager. That unfortunately, the data that I'm sure you've all seen is immediate managers tend to be the company for the employee. So depending on how good or bad they are, certainly drives how employees feel about their level of engagement and desire to stay in the workspace. And so if they've got a bad manager, some of the things they want to do is they want to escape that bad manager by working remotely. Obviously, work-life balance is an important consideration, another reason why people are desirous of remote work. And then they also cited just some of the policies around the workplace were things that employees did not find beneficial to their particular interest. And was another reason why they wanted to work remotely. If you look at some of the generations at work data, as you can see, almost 70% of millennials would actually forego other work benefits simply by having, if it was offset by being able to work remotely. And 74% of the millennial and Gen Z managers allow team members to spend a large proportion of their time working remotely. You compare and contrast that with baby boomer managers and or owners or whatnot, and the number drops off significantly in terms of their willingness to allow employees to work remotely. And then at a 2x level, millennial and Gen Z management are more interested in investing in technology that would enable employees to work remotely. So again, some considerations for you to think about. Just talk a little bit about employee engagement. As I'm sure you've read and understand, employee engagement is clearly one of the major drivers to retaining employees. And so when you look at some of the data that's out there, I found some of it to be pretty interesting. In a Gallup survey, only 15% of employees worldwide are actually even engaged in their job. 39% of the workers work harder if they found themselves in a workplace that they thought was better to work in. 42% of employees say that due to some training is the most important benefit to them, followed by healthcare. 58% of workers say they'd start a job at a lower salary if that meant working for a great boss. More than 80% of workers are either actively or inactively looking for a new job and are open to a new one, which is just stunning to me. And offering career training and development keep 86% of millennials from leaving their current position. So you're starting to get sort of a theme here for some of these data points in terms of what people are or aren't doing. And finally, nearly half of employees said that they quit a job because of a bad manager. 56% think their managers are promoted prematurely, and 60% think managers need managerial training. And so I can't speak to what is being done in each of your businesses, but clearly a big rock may be your level of management training and to what degree that's being done. Oftentimes, there isn't a whole lot of formalized manager training that's done in terms, particularly for people skills. And so usually my experience is that management tends to lead and manage the way they were in the absence of any type of formalized training or process. I had the opportunity when I was at Procter & Gamble to lead some management training for the company. And so I had some responsibility for training new managers how to become a manager. And clearly some of the people that I would inherit were in their position prior to getting this experience. And that was very clear to me that they basically managed the way they had been managed, right, wrong, or indifferent, and left for lots of opportunity for some learned behavior and how to think about managing people, because it isn't as simple as a personality or DNA thing. There are learned behaviors and skill sets that people can have relative to managing people. So why do people leave? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. Some of the things that we all know, obviously dissatisfaction with their manager comes up again, dissatisfaction with their pay, and their perception that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence relative to their compensation. And oftentimes that can occur in the absence of a level of transparent conversation regarding what their compensation plan is, to what degree an employer is benchmarking that compensation against other things, and to what degree that employer is transparently communicating to the employee what that grass on the other side actually is or could be, and helping them understand from a total comp perspective what that looks like for them, and leading them towards their decision making around whether or not the grass is or isn't greener. And obviously the environment or culture of the workplace is another important factor. Oftentimes, again, back to this, in the absence of transparent conversations and discussions with employees, they can real or perceive rewards, developmental opportunities, compensation, you name it, as being a better alternative someplace else. That's because they don't have any relativity around what they have already. You also have some people that walk in your door with sort of a preconceived, predetermined plan to move on. And my counsel to you would be, if it's a personal thing, like some of these exceptions down here, spouse become pregnant, et cetera, that necessarily isn't in your control. But what is in your control is, I would encourage you, when you think about retention really starts in your recruiting and the process you take to bring somebody on. So understanding from people, candidates, recruits, how they tick and what they think about their employment and what they think their future looks like at your business, and sort of understanding that up front might help you think about, and might prove to be a indicator as to whether or not they are or aren't somebody that you should hire. So I'd encourage you to think about, during your recruiting and interviewing process, to what degree you're learning about how people perceive themselves in your place of business over time. So why do they stay? Again, as you might imagine, relationships, manager admiration and respect. To what degree do they have that respectful relationship with their immediate manager, and to what degree they're socialized with the people that they work with. This idea of a sense of belonging to a company, how a company impacts the community and drives sense of pride. If you can connect the dot between what somebody does for you, what they do for their living, and how that impacts the greater good of people, there's a large percentage of employees that want to feel part of something bigger than just the job they do and the hourly wage or the annual salary that they get. So having communication with people and helping them understand how it is their work contributes to the greater good of what your company is doing, again, is another reason why people choose to stay at a given company. Why else do they stay? Well, how and if they are recognized in the performance of their work, and the level of transparent communication the more of it, the more they tend to want to stay within that type of culture and environment. Here's a plan overview. This is an example of some sort of major retention strategies and best practices that I would ask you to think about, as to what degree do you have these, and if so, think about what you're doing within them. If you don't have any of these, or you're questioning your efficiency around doing them, feel free to reach out to me afterward, and I can work with you in terms of what it is you're doing today, and perhaps I can help you move that along a little bit. So establish an employee strategy, right? Do you have an employee strategy? Is it just a intuitive, good idea that makes sense, that I want my employees to be happy and I want them to engage? Or have you actually taken the time to put pen to paper and come up with what your strategy is? An example would be, have zero regrettable turnover, would be an example of what you want to have happen. And then what would be the hows? What are the things that you're going to do with your people to ensure that you deliver against the how and the what? So we can establish employee strategy, do you or don't. Create a recruitment plan. Do you have a recruitment plan today? And within that plan, are you thinking about retention upfront and the way that you write your job descriptions, the way you advertise for the position, the way you interview? Are you gaining data in that recruitment plan and those candidates to have a sense of how they tick once they become one of your employees, and the potential for them to work for you long term? Socialize new hires, onboarding, orientation, whatever you want to call it. To what degree do you have, again, some formalized strategies that you're following when you're socializing your new hires, both with the coworkers that they work with, as well as the broader company good that you do? Develop a training plan. Do you have a formalized training plan that is in writing that people can see? Do employees know what their development opportunities are, where their strengths and weaknesses are, and do they feel like, as a company, you are investing in them and there's an actual plan that's designed to help them progress and get better? Benchmark compensation and rewards. So to what degree are you, whether it's salary.com, Glassdoor, whatnot, to what degree are you taking a look at the types of positions you have in your company, and as best you can trying to gain some benchmarks against those? And to what degree are you communicating transparently what that looks like, not only for you as an employee to assess whether or not you are or aren't up to speed with what your benchmarking data suggests, which may suggest that your overall pay plan is not consistent with what is happening in your business and you need to change that, and/or it is consistent, it's in the same zip code as what you're finding others are doing, but you just need to communicate that so your employees understand sort of what that looks like. Otherwise, they'll draw their own conclusions. And then leads or leaders. To what degree are you, again, back to training development, how are you assessing the capability of your managers and your leaders as it relates to their skill set to coach, direct, et cetera? And if they don't have any formalized structure to what that looks like, and they're intuitively doing it, that may or may not be the answer that you need to have employees stay engaged and be retained. So some retention strategies and best practices at a macro level. Again, if you want to dive into any of these and learn a little bit more, feel free to reach out to myself, and I'd be happy to spend some time with you. I think you're going to see some examples as we move through some of the member perspectives on how they are attacking each of these strategies and best practices. So with that, I do want to offer some member perspective. As I said, Rebecca Smith will be joining me from Pickering Laboratories. Rebecca has put together some information on some of the things that Pickering is doing relative to staff retention. Kim Ramsey, who had a family vacation and is therefore not on, did spend some time, and thanks to Kim for putting some slides together on some of the things that Nielsen Research Corporation is doing. And same with Ilan. Ilan also had a conflict that would allow him to be here as well, but same thing, also put some slides together, and so Rebecca and I can review those slides on their behalf. I promise them we'll try not to screw that up as best we can. But with that, I do want to take a minute and turn it over to Rebecca. Rebecca will cover what they're doing at Pickering relative to staff retention. Rebecca?
Thanks, Kelly. I think Kim is here. I don't know if she's here just to listen or if she's able to present, but when I'm done, we can just see if she's got her mic on or not. So yeah, I'm Rebecca with Pickering. I'm in a vice president role. I was originally a chemist. I was promoted in late 2014, which is one of my slides. So can you advance the slide, Kelly? Thank you. So I think that I will touch on some of the stuff that Kelly has brought up, starting really with culture. Staff retention is a top-down philosophy with Pickering. Michael Pickering finished his PhD and did some postdoc work, and then he started working for instrument companies. He worked for Durham Instruments and he worked for Spectra Physics. And he really didn't find himself fitting into the corporate culture. He would tell stories, and one of the things he always said he hated was hearing, well, we've always done it this way. So he took an idea for our flagship product and he went and started this company, Pickering Laboratories. And he founded it specifically to create a place where people wanted to come to work, where he would want to come to work. And in fact, it has been very successful. And for the rest of his life, he worked here at Pickering. So retention is an important metric for what I'm gauged against, what Jim, our president, is gauged against, and it's reinforced all the way down, right? So we have a really big focus on a work-life balance. We're way more flexible than your average employee when it comes to needing to take time off to go pick up a sick kid, or spending 3 weeks working an earlier shift because they have a after-school problem, something like that. We're also really tasked, I'm driven not to bottom line maximum profit, but we provide really excellent employee benefits. Our insurance broker calls us overinsured, and then we make sure we highlight that, right? Hey, we're the #1 out of 400 small business employees when it comes to providing health insurance for you guys. And every year I talk about our health benefits, or I talk about, adding a 401k benefit. We really try to make what we offer visible, because we're not going to be, as a small business, the strongest when it comes to salaries, but we can be the strongest in some of these other areas. And then our long tenured staff are really happy to be here. They're very enthusiastic about the company, about our brand, about our products. And so as we get new hires, which I don't have a retention problem, I have a retirement problem maybe these days. So when we get new hires in, people are really happy, and it shows, and they share that enthusiasm, and it really helps us retain, our new hires as we add on to our staff. I do occasionally lose candidates that are really ambitious. A small business isn't the place where you're going to find a home if you're looking to climb a corporate ladder. But when we find a mutual good fit, then we keep our staff for forever, for the rest of their career. In 2020, I had 4 people hit 20 years of service, and I've had 2 people hit 30 years of service this year. Customer focus is a big core competency for us, and purpose is another thing you'll hear both in my slides and I think in the slides to come. We support essential work. We were open and working during the pandemic, and that shared sense of purpose really gives everybody something to work towards together. So we emphasize, that each employee's quality of work impacts our customers, impacts our reputation, impacts our business, right? And so it's even some of our non-customer facing roles, right? Our packaging guru, for example, that are some of our strongest advocates for quality, for our service, for support. They're really going to bat and saying, no, that label's not straight. We're going to take it off and redo it. Next slide. Kelly? Thanks. So the other thing that I think has just really been important for us is managing change. We've had a lot of change. I was promoted late in 2014, and that was a big change for people here, and it took a lot of change management. We lost our founder, Michael Pickering, passed away in 2017. In 2019, we managed through a couple of really big retirements. My production manager here manages half the staff, and he'd been here for over 20 years, and his retirement was a big change, right? And I really think that the most important thing for retention in this capacity has been pace, being really sensitive, being really respectful to the, the emotional upheaval that comes with change. And I think being able to take our time, right, and hold off on some changes in order to process others really helped us retain key staff members that we might have otherwise lost, right? If your best work friend in the whole world is retiring, you may think it's time to go too, but the staff is really invested in our future here. And so I've had people extend their retirement to make sure that my new employees that are coming on get up to speed and kind of space out that like institutional knowledge that comes from working here for 20 years and, take the extra year or 18 months beyond when they plan to retire to really help kind of do that brain transplant. We do a big push towards visibility and transparency. So whatever I can talk to the staff about at a high level, obviously not everything, but when and where I can, I'm debriefing them. I'm walking around talking one-on-one to them, or I'm just doing stand-up meetings with a monthly luncheon and talking about, sales, talking about what's coming, talking about new big customers, whatever we can to give them a sense of the bigger picture of the organization. And this gives our employees a real sense of ownership that comes through really strongly here. And it can come with a sense of entitlement too, if we're being completely honest. So there's a little bit of a balance that has to happen when it comes to managing the staff. The other real thing I think that helps us keep our employees for 20 and 30 years is autonomy, right? We really lean in to help, but our staff are experts. They've been doing what they're doing. They're manufacturing a product, or they're purifying a chemical, for years. And so we don't micromanage their time or their work. There's no supervisor that's standing over their shoulder. They lean in and help, right? My new production manager especially is very willing to jump in and get his hands dirty. I mean, all of us are. And so like they feel like they have help and they can ask for help and they're really supported, but they also feel like they're left alone to do the job that they're good at doing. So I hope that gives some insight. At the end, if you guys have questions, I'm more than happy to get more specific.
Yeah, that's great stuff, Rebecca. Thanks for sharing some of the things you guys are doing at Pickering Labs to keep your employees engaged and retained. I'm sure if anyone has questions, as Jessica mentioned, just go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll be happy to follow up on those. So thank you. I'm going to turn my attention to some of the slides that Kim Ramsey from Nielsen Research Corporation provided. And so I'm sure I won't do them justice as if she were here. I will try to walk you through the slides, at least as what she's written. As I looked at these, not unlike Rebecca's and Alon's, are all chock full of good information for you to consider. And importantly, things that are working to keep employees engaged and retained. So in Kim's slide, she speaks to this notion of accept change. You will likely need to change first. So that as a leader at Nielsen, it sounds like Kim has learned that she needs to be pretty flexible and agile when it comes to learning what's needed to deal with a diverse workplace. Educate yourself, study your staff's generations and how you can manage them. I know that there's a lot of information out there about generations at work, and the fact of the matter is generationally, again, bell-shaped curve, we do have some differences in the way that we think about things, and diversity is, of course, simply understanding, appreciating how others think, and trying to create an environment that makes them feel included in what it is that you want. Ultimately, that leads to a much more productive workforce. He counsels to take a look at some other companies like Apple and Google and other large companies that some generations may be reading about in terms of what they do. Employee surveys are great tools to see where to improve. So, We're all data-based people, so getting some data relative to what it is people think about and how they feel about working for you and your company is important and oftentimes very actionable. And this appears to be some data that Nielsen did in 2019 relative to, again, generations at work, employee satisfaction by generation. And as you can see, there's quite a difference between the baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials. And so I'm sure that's a data point that Kim used as she thought about her workplace and what potential actions she may need to take in order to have the diversity of her workplace become a little bit more even in terms of employee satisfaction. So what did we change to make our entire staff feel more inclusive? This is a laundry list beyond the traditional 401k, health, dental, et cetera. This is a litany of a lot of different things that Nielsen offers relative to creating an environment that engages the employees, makes them feel important, and obviously allows for her to have a pretty favorable retention level. And I won't read these all to you. You can read them all for yourself. There's quite a bit of stuff in here. I think I'll go work for Nielsen, given all the things that they're offering. That's a lot of stuff, and I can see why people would like to work at Nielsen. A lot of good stuff. Not to mention the kiddies. Education and cross training, fill their knowledge bank. This concept of employees, particularly the newer generation, wants more. So in Nielsen's case, they gave them more. This idea of Education Mondays with departmental overviews of what's happening, webinars, conferences, constant cross training with recognition are all obviously all good things that they're using at Nielsen to make sure their employees are engaged. They want to know they are making an impact on their community within their work. And again, this speaks to some of the Harvard Business Review learnings we talked about earlier in terms of having people have a sense of pride and belonging to the company that they work in. And so at Nielsen, they inform their employees on any big project and why the client is testing. They actually take them out to the staff out to the sampling field to get a sense of what that even looks like. They teach them about the data and how it affects the client. And they also do community outreach. In this case, it looks like they partner with Rogue River Watershed Council, and the employees have an opportunity to give back to the community, the whole concept of sustainability. Most important, make sure you give them recognition all the time. And they do that at Nielsen in the form of public shout outs, tell them how much they're appreciated, tell them thank you. Your business is nothing without them. Always smile and create a culture in your workplace that begins with the owner and manager. So again, all things that sometimes we intuitively know, but sometimes we don't necessarily always do. And so I think if you can make them part of some type of employee strategy, those are the kind of things that help keep employees engaged and retained. I'm sure this is when Rebecca reviewed her content and Kim created hers and Elon created his, I'm sure these are all things that they are doing and are on paper and need to do, and probably why in all cases they're successful. So hard work and accepting change pays off. Rebecca talked earlier about this whole idea of change management, which is a whole other subject that eventually we maybe can get into, because there are some methods in madness to how you manage change. Again, formally a learner behavior as opposed to what you might intuitively think is wrong. In 2021, employee satisfaction surveys from Nielsen Research concluded with 92% satisfaction across the board. And when you compare and contrast that in the net promoter scores back from July of 19, in a 2-year period of time, they've more than doubled how employees found themselves to be satisfied at Nielsen, going from 44, 86 to then 92. So again, it's always great to have data and understanding through surveys and whatnot how employees are feeling. Certainly can do that. I can't speak to exactly what Nielsen is using. I would assume it's some type of HR software and whatnot that allows these types of surveys to take place. Importantly, things like anonymity and whatnot relative to completing those surveys helps drive the data tends to be a little bit better if employees feel like they're not necessarily being identified, and therefore maybe answer more honestly. So, Kim just chatted in. Apparently, she's at Disney, and she says it's too loud for her to chime in, which we can understand. It looks like that Bamboo HR is the product that they're using. So for those of you using Bamboo, you're probably already doing something similar, or if you're not, certainly a functionality you could take advantage of. So that's the data from Nielsen Research. Again, thanks to Kim for providing the slides and what they're doing at Nielsen to drive and keep employees engaged and retained. Let's turn our attention. I'm going to give the microphone back to Rebecca, and she's going to review the slides that Elon provided in terms of what Alchemist is doing as well. So with that.
Thanks, Kelly. So all of these beautifully green colored slides are from Alchemist Labs. Elon Sedberg prepared them. And Alchemist is a passionately committed family-owned plant and fungus lab. The lab is 25 years old and has 40 employees, which is pretty much the opposite of Pickering. We're 40 years old with 20 employees. And the team at Alchemist strongly believes that company culture is the DNA of any successful operation, which he says, you know, this isn't a new idea, but it's something that needs to have more attention paid to it than ever before. And this looks really familiar. It looks a lot like the quote that you led with, Kelly. But just like when you're doing any test in the laboratory, even with employee retention, the devil's in the details. So if you're not paying attention to your employees, you'll be missing key data, and before you know it, the culture could be toxic, and it's very hard to recuperate from that toxic culture, right? His point is you let things go too far and all of a sudden you're completely screwed. So they use a different tool. They don't use Bamboo HR, but they use TinyPulse. So Alchemist Labs deployed TinyPulse back in 2019 after a bad hire, and they had missed the signs because of their hiring practices. They missed the signs, and so they ended up with this employee retention issue. And so Elon says that TinyPulse has been his eyes and ears ever since, and it's offered him insight that he would have never previously had. And from the data that he generates with TinyPulse, he's able to make changes, and now they have a really happy team. Like there's been a big change since 2019, which seems like a theme with Nielsen also. So these are examples of surveys they send out all the time. They're very kind of quick one-liners. They send them out every other week. And so this is a list of completed surveys. He says it's really easy and important to watch the trends and correlate them to events that are in and out of his control. So his team's looking at this data relative to what's happening in the lab and what's happening in the world and what's happening, you know, perhaps with other employees' personal lives. So some of the topics here are stress at work or other job offers and how they would potentially respond to those. Organizational goals and connecting and understanding with those, and then a sense of purpose for his team. The next slide shows what he calls the happiness trend. So it's how happy are you at work, and he collects data on this over time. So he wants to know what the heck happened in June, right? So when he looked back, one of their busiest months ever was June, and so the lab was really, really squeezed. And it was good to see the results in real time, because then he was able to jump in and add resources as needed and correct that issue in real time, right? He's able to address that unhappiness like almost live, because he's got these touch points that keep going out every other week. And so without these data points, right, he would feel like he was completely blind, especially now that he's been working off of this tool for a little while. So if we took a look at the next slide, these are the up and coming surveys that are coming out with TinyPulse, right? So there's some on innovation or growth, right? The organization's prospects today versus a year ago. He's asking questions of if they're proud to work for the lab. So that's another question that kind of ties back into purpose. He's asking about work-life balance. Communication and professionalism questions are coming through, and a question I really liked around culture and diversity and if it's a strength for his organization. And finally, he says work-life balance is his second favorite value on his wall. I think he means that there are literally values on a wall. And it's second only to reciprocity. There we go. By deploying TinyPulse, they have access to data that can help make positive changes for both employee morale as well as the bottom line. So he really is reinforcing the idea of using this TinyPulse tool and all of these ongoing surveys. And those are the notes that I have from Alchemist Labs.
Thanks, Rebecca, for pinch hitting for Elon. Good content from Elon. Before I turn it over to Jessica to get into any questions, I did want to say the nice thing about these employee survey, whatever software program you're using, they're sort of all the same. But what's nice about them, if you are using them, is I like the fact that they sort of have the if-then functionality built in. So it allows you to have an employee who, answers B, A, B, or C. If you answer A, then it takes you to 1. If you answer B, then it takes you to 2. If you answer C, it takes you to 3. So you get this, Rebecca used the word devil in the detail, right? You get this driver into more insight, as opposed to oftentimes surveys can be so overview and broad that you're left with really nothing you can sink your teeth on and what you can learn or do. And so many of the surveys today, they allow that level of drill down so that you can actually pull off data that says that data is more actionable than sort of maybe some surveys in the past where it was sort of a yes or no kind of thing, and they couldn't do a whole lot with it. So if you are already doing that kind of thing, wonderful. Feel free to let us know how that's working for you. If you are interested in learning more about those types of things, just let Jessica know, and we can make sure you get the information you need. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica. Thanks for your time and attention. And it looks like we do have some chat questions, and I'll let her sort of moderate that. So Jessica.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Rebecca. Right now, we don't really have any questions. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat box and we will address those. And again, just to reiterate, this will be recorded and will be on the ACIL website by the end of the day today. So still not seeing any questions here.
I thought for sure the picture of the cute dog raising its paw would motivate someone.
Okay, we have one now. The dog did it. Is inflation a concern on retention? Question mark. Bigger raises? Question mark. That is from David Fronin.
I can chime in just for a second, Kelly, and then you can add.
Sure.
So I sort of hedged our bets this year with inflation. I'm in the middle of learning some more about inflation and economics and finance. And so what we did is we did a little bit bigger bump than normal for salaries. And then I actually did the rest with a bonus so that overall I wasn't committing us long term to a bigger bump, but I did do a total comp increase that was a little bit more than perhaps we otherwise would, because I know, for the next 6 months, we are going to be seeing this short-term inflation from the supply chain that impacts things like cream cheese. So that's kind of how we approached it, if that helps.
Thanks, Rebecca. I would say, David, your question is a good one. And like many things, for us at EST, it isn't necessarily a straightaway answer. So I think here are the things that I think about when I think about compensation for the company and things like inflation and retention and whatnot. Fortunately, I have benchmarking compensation data across all our roles. So, we have pay bands, within a given role, within a given level, and I have that in a spreadsheet that calculates itself out over time. So I look at that data. I also look at obviously what the inflationary rate is. I look at that data as well. And then everything that we do at EST relative to comp is predicated on the profitability of the company. And employees know that. So while we're not an ESOP, employees know that their contribution and how the company does overall impacts how they get paid. And so that means it's not a one size fits all, right? So obviously it starts with how profitable the company is. So how much money do I have here in the company that that's dispensable, if you will, that I can use for things like bonuses and pay raises and whatnot. So we do that. And so health of the company drives that, and then performance of the employee. So we have what we call a personal professional development plan for each employee that does all the things you might think would be in a development plan, and they are assessed against that work plan every year. And so their performance, we've got a min, a mid, a min, and a max level of compensation salary increases that's tied to that performance. So as you can see, the dominoes are benchmarked. Where is a given person in their role, salary within their band against that benchmarking data? How did the company perform? How did the employee perform? What is the inflationary rate? You throw all that stuff and you mix it all up, and it can look different for each employee based on those things that I just mentioned. So bigger raises, yeah, for some people that can happen. I think that given the state we're in, as I mentioned about sort of those pay increases by band, I do plan on increasing what were those thresholds this coming pay year because of inflation. And so I've got some math that speaks to based on the inflationary rate. And of course, it depends on what economist model you look at. But I do have some data that speaks to how we ought to think about what we bump to what and where. So I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to chat me again or look me up and we can talk a little bit more. I see that Kurt Weaver has a question. Everyone is a mid-level manager. Do you see trend to spend more time and focus with their veteran staff, or say newer staff to gain better retention and less turnover in the short term? So you want me to take that, Rebecca, or you want to take a stab at that?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Is it too, this is Kim. If it's too noisy, just let me know. There's Christmas music in the background. But I can actually take that one. So the difference with the young staff, the newer staff, and the older staff is not a lot. You'll find out that if you start making changes that kind of adapt to your newer staff, your older staff is going to appreciate it just as much, and your veteran staff. And so in the surveys that I was doing, I was really trying to focus on the millennials because you could tell that I was struggling in that department. And it turned out that my veteran staff just absolutely ate it up and was super happy to see, the flexible schedules and the drink fridge and just the little things that you can do for changes actually changes your company culture all the way across the board. And then as far as salaries, absolutely, we had to take a look at inflation. We had several employees that, their dollar amount was close to what In-N-Out was paying, In-N-Out Burger. And so obviously I had to move them up. And then if you really take a look at your employees, and your question is if this person were to quit today, what would I do? Would I be able to, would I try to do anything I can and everything I can to keep this employee, or maybe I'm okay with that, that employee leaving? And if your answer is I want to do everything I can to keep this employee because my company would be in trouble, then you should absolutely consider raising that salary because there's so many opportunities out there for jobs nowadays. So anyhow, that's all I have for that.
No, we didn't have any, I didn't have any trouble hearing you, Kim. So wherever you're at, it was fine. We can hear you just fine.
I'm in front of the Coca-Cola store in Disney Springs, but my son is in there tasting every soda pop possible.
Well, enjoy. And it was awful nice of you to break away at the time. Thank you. Did you get a chance? Did you get a chance to hear us do your slides? And
I did, yeah. They
any
were
other
shopping.
any other color commentary you wanted to add while we got you for a minute?
No, I think you covered them very well. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Yep, thank you. Okay, I'm looking for more questions. I don't know that Jessica, I don't know that I see any more.
I don't see any more either.
I would say if Kurt, if you're still on, did you hear anything that was helpful for you, or do you still have a stone left unturned that you wanted to chat more about?
Looks like he's all set.
All right. Well, I think if there's no more questions, oh yeah, he said all set, thank you. No more questions, Jessica. I think we can probably put a wrap on it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Elon. We appreciate your presentation and thank you all for joining us today. This is our last ACIL webinar of the year, so everyone have a happy holidays and we will look forward to seeing you on the next ACIL webinar.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.